There is a specific texture to the silence that arrives after years of unmitigated noise. It is not the hollow, echoing silence of an abandoned house, nor is it the fearful silence of a child hiding in a closet. It is a dense, deliberate silence. It is the silence of a library after the doors have been locked, or the stillness of a forest after a heavy snow has swallowed the topography. This silence begins not in the world, but in the pocket. It starts when the phone vibrates, a frantic, demanding buzz, and you simply look at it. You do not flinch. You do not feel that familiar spike of cortisol, that Pavlovian urge to serve, to answer, to fix. You watch the screen light up, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of your living room, and then you watch it go dark again. You place the device face down. You return to your coffee, which is still warm. To the outside world, this looks like an ending. It looks like a severance, a cold shoulder, a sudden and inexplicable cruelty. They call it cutting people off. They label it ghosting, antisocial behavior, or a depressive episode. But from the inside, from the center of the static psychology of the self, it feels entirely different. It feels like the first full breath you have taken in a decade. This phenomenon, the total withdrawal from social obligation, the pruning of the contact list, the retreat into a fortress of solitude, is rarely an act of aggression. It is almost always an act of biological and spiritual conservation. It is the inevitable result of a mathematical equation that has been unbalanced for too long. It is what happens when the vessel realizes it has been pouring into sieves. To understand the architecture of this isolation, one must perform an excavation of the past. This state of being did not materialize overnight. One does not wake up on a Tuesday and decide to become an island. The geography of isolation is formed through the slow tectonic shifts of disappointment. If we look closely at the history of the person who has gone silent, we almost invariably find a history of noise. We find a person who was, for years, the universal donor of their social ecosystem. This is the person who remembered the birthdays, who sent the just checking in texts, who drove across town at 2 a.m. to soothe a crisis, who listened to the same complaints on a loop for years, offering advice that was nodded at and ignored. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that accumulates in the marrow of the strong friend. It is a fatigue born of hypervigilance. You learned, perhaps very early on, to scan the room. You learned to read the micro-expressions of parents, partners, or peers. You became an expert in the emotional weather of others, adjusting your own climate to accommodate their storms. You became a thermostat for everyone else's comfort, constantly regulating, constantly giving. Often, this pattern is rooted in the quiet trauma of early independence. There are children who learn, before they can articulate it, that their needs are secondary to the equilibrium of the household. They learn that love is not a baseline but a transaction. I am useful, therefore I am safe. They become the fixers, the mediators, the invisible supports. They cultivate a high tolerance for neglect and a low tolerance for their own vulnerability. Over time, this creates a profound asymmetry. You exist in a crowded room, yet you are entirely unseen. You are surrounded by people who claim to love you, yet they only know the version of you that serves them. You are the architectural column that holds up the roof. Everyone admires the structure, but no one asks if the stone is cracking under the weight. The cutting off is not a sudden snap. It is the sound of the stone finally accepting gravity. It is the realization that the loneliness you feel when you are by yourself is preferable to the loneliness you feel when you are with people who do not see you. The transition into this static state is often marked by a shift in perception. It is as if the color grading of your life changes. The frantic urgency of social maintenance begins to look absurd. You begin to observe your interactions with the detachment of a scientist. You look at a text message thread and see the visual representation of the imbalance. Long paragraphs of your own support, empathy, and questions, met with brief, self-centered responses. You see the dates. You realize that if you stopped initiating, the silence would have happened years ago. This awareness is painful. It is a kind of grief. It requires you to admit that many of the connections you anchored your identity to were, in fact, tethered only by your own effort. You were holding a rope that went slack the moment you stopped pulling. But following the grief comes the choice. This is the moment of the great quiet. You stop explaining. This is the most crucial shift. In the past, if you couldn't attend an event, you would offer a paragraph of apology, a detailed excuse, a promise to make it up. Now, you simply say, "I can't make it." You stop offering the soft padding of social lies. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop reaching out to see if people are angry with you. This is the hardest habit to break, the hyper-vigilant check-in. Asterisk. Are we okay? Did I do something wrong? Asterisk. You realize that if someone is angry, it is their responsibility to communicate it. You retire from the job of mind reader. As you withdraw, the energy that was previously hemorrhaging outward begins to pool back inside. It is a physical sensation. You sleep better. The knot in your stomach, which you thought was just your anatomy, begins to unravel. You find you have time to stare at the wall, to read a book, to simply sit. This is not emptiness. It is the reclamation of space. The external reaction to this shift is predictable and, frankly, irrelevant to the internal process. When a person who has always been accessible suddenly becomes inaccessible, the world reacts with confusion and often hostility. People hate change, especially when that change inconveniences them. The friends who used you as an emotional dumping ground will feel the gates close. They will knock. And when you do not answer, they will not worry about your well-being. They will be offended. They will call you cold. They will say you have changed. They will craft narratives in which you are the villain, the arrogant, distant figure who thinks they are better than everyone else. Let them. This is a central tenet of the psychology of withdrawal. The acceptance of being the villain in someone else's story. You cannot control the version of you that exists in their minds. If their narrative requires you to be the bad guy because you stopped allowing them to use you, then you must wear that black hat with peace. They do not see the years of effort. They do not see the nights you spent worrying about their problems while they slept soundly. They do not see the slow erosion of your spirit. They only see the wall. They do not understand that the wall is not there to punish them. It is there to protect the tender, recovering ecosystem of your own soul. Biologically, this state of cutting everyone off is a nervous system reset. For years, perhaps decades, your body has been stuck in a sympathetic dominance fight, flight, or fawn. You have been running on cortisol and adrenaline, treating social interactions as potential threats to be managed or crises to be solved. When you continuously pour energy into unreciprocated attachments, the brain registers this as a survival threat. It perceives a depletion of resources. The pain of rejection or indifference activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. To the brain, being emotionally neglected by your tribe is a precursor to death. Eventually, the brain says, "Enough." The withdrawal is a shift into a dorsal vagal state, a immobilization, but one of safety rather than fear. It is a hibernation. The bear does not apologize for entering the cave when the winter comes. It does not worry that the squirrels will miss it. It understands that to survive the season, it must conserve every ounce of heat. You are entering your winter. This is not a depression, though it shares the stillness of it. It is a functional freeze. Your body is building boundaries because it knows you are too tired to fight. It is closing the shutters so you can finally rest without the sun glaring in your eyes. In this space of solitude, a strange and beautiful thing happens. You begin to meet yourself. When you are no longer defined by your utility to others, you have to figure out who you are. Without the noise of other people's opinions, expectations, and dramas, your own voice becomes audible. It is quiet at first, rusty from disuse, but it is there. You discover that you actually enjoy things you pretended to dislike, or dislike things you pretended to enjoy for the sake of the group. You realize that your value is intrinsic, not extrinsic. You exist simply because you exist, not because you are helping, fixing. This is the freedom of the empty room. It is the realization that a Saturday night spent alone with a book and a cup of tea is not a failure of popularity, but a triumph of peace. You look around at your life small, quiet, contained, and you feel a sense of ownership. This time is yours. This energy is yours. This breath is yours. The fear of missing out dissolves, replaced by the joy of missing out. You imagine the crowded parties, the forced conversations, the draining dynamics of the group chat, and you feel a profound relief to be absent. You are no longer an extra in their movie. You are the director of your own quiet documentary. Does this mean you will stay in the cave forever? Not necessarily. But the terms of engagement have changed permanently. When you have spent time in the silence, you become very particular about the noise you allow back in. You realize that access to you is a privilege, not a right. You may eventually open the door again, but the lock has been changed. Future relationships will not be based on trauma bonding or the dynamic of the savior and the saved. They will be based on mutual respect, reciprocal energy, and the capacity for silence. You will look for people who can sit in the room with you without demanding that you entertain them. You will look for people who water their own gardens, so you don't have to drag your hose across the fence every day. But even if those people do not appear, you are no longer afraid. You have faced the worst-case scenario, being alone, and found that it is not a wasteland. It is a sanctuary. If you are currently in this phase, if you are the one who has stopped replying, who has deleted the apps, who has declined the invitations, know this: you are not broken. You are not cruel. You are not antisocial in the pathological sense. You are molting. You are shedding a skin that no longer fits. A skin made of other people's expectations and your own old patterns of survival. The process is raw. The new skin is tender. It requires protection. Do not let the guilt consume you. The guilt is just the ghost of your old conditioning, whispering that you are only good if you are giving. Let the guilt float through you like a cloud, observing it without attaching to it. Protect the flame. Deep inside, there is a small, flickering light that is your vital life force. For years, the winds of other people's chaos have threatened to blow it out. You have cupped your hands around it, trembling, trying to keep it alive. Now, by closing the door, you have created a windless space. The flame is steadying. It is growing brighter. You do not need to explain the light to those who are used to the dark. You do not need to justify your survival. You are simply living for yourself. Perhaps, for the first time, sit in the chair. Listen to the hum of the refrigerator, the wind against the glass, the beating of your own heart. This is the sound of your life returning to you. It is not empty. It is full of peace. And that is enough.